A Parallel of Reformation. Martin Luther and the Catholic Church versus intelligent design and the academic establishment. Historically, movements that challenge the reigning intellectual or institutional authorities often share a common theme. They begin with the courage to question, push against entrenched dogma, and fight for truth outside the established corridors of power. The Protestant Reformation, which Martin Luther led against the Catholic Church, is one of the most striking examples. A similar conflict is occurring in modern times as intelligent design, ID supporters contest the academic elite's intellectual orthodoxy of evolutionary theory. Both movements represent a fight against institutions that have become dogmatic and resistant to new ideas, and both aim to offer alternative perspectives in the face of institutional hostility. Martin Luther and the Reformation. A battle against dogma. Martin Luther's protest against the Catholic Church in the early 16th century was not merely a theological dispute, but a rebellion against an institution that had grown complacent and corrupt. The Church wielded immense power over the hearts and minds of Europe, controlling not only religious thought, but also cultural and intellectual life. Indulgences, a practice where people could essentially buy forgiveness for their sins, became one of the most glaring examples of the Church's corruption. Luther's 95 Theses, nailed to the church door in Wittenberg in 1517, were a direct challenge to this authority. His arguments were not initially intended to break from the Church, but to reform it from within. However, when met with resistance and condemnation, Luther and his followers realized that reform could not come from within such a deeply entrenched institution. His fight eventually grew into a sweeping movement that shook the foundation of Western Christianity, resulting in the formation of Protestantism and changing the religious landscape of Europe forever. Luther's stance was simple yet profound. The truth about salvation and God's grace should be available to everyone and not controlled or obscured by a corrupt hierarchy. He took his fight to the people, printing his works in the vernacular and using the printing press to bypass the established gatekeepers of intellectual discourse. Intelligent design, challenging the dogma of Darwinism. Today, a similar battle is being waged. Still, the field is not theology, it is science, and the institution under scrutiny is not the Catholic Church, but the academic establishment, particularly the gatekeepers of evolutionary biology. Intelligent design, ID proponents, like Luther, are not simply interested in tearing down the current order, but in offering an alternative explanation to the dogma of Darwinism that has dominated biology for over a century. The parallels are striking. Just as the Catholic Church resisted Luther's reforms, refusing to acknowledge the corruption within its ranks, today's scientific community, especially in universities and research institutions, refuses to recognize the growing evidence that random mutation and natural selection may not be sufficient to explain the origin of life and the complexity of biological systems. ID's proponents argue that the specified complexity found in DNA, the intricate machinery of cellular systems like the bacterial flagellum, and the fine-tuning of the universe point to an intelligent cause. However, rather than engaging with the scientific evidence, the academic establishment often resorts to dismissing ID as pseudoscience without offering rigorous refutations of its core claims. In this way, the scientific hierarchy mirrors the Catholic hierarchy of Luther's day, resistant to reform, clinging to its power, and unwilling to allow challenges to its intellectual authority. Overthrowing dogma. Outside corrupt institutions. Like Luther, ID proponents have realized that reform within these institutions is nearly impossible. Universities and research academies, where Darwinian evolution reigns supreme, are entrenched in their views. They guard their funding, reputations, and positions with the same zeal as the Church guarded its theological monopoly. As Luther demonstrated, the solution is to take the message directly to the people. Instead of working within corrupt institutions, ID proponents publish books, produce documentaries, and organize conferences that reach the public directly. In an age of the internet and mass media, just as Luther used the printing press to spread his message, ID advocates bypass academic gatekeepers and offer their evidence and arguments for the public to judge. Luther understood that the truth could not be confined to institutions with vested interests in maintaining the status quo. Similarly, ID proponents understand that academic elites who refuse to engage with alternative scientific ideas should not dictate the truth about life's origins.